I'll try to be quick in my intervention. So my name is Dana Bachmann. I work as head of unit in DG Employment in the unit responsible for social protection. And we thought it would be good to give you a bit of context to pensions in general. And of course, in our work, we focus a lot on public pensions, and most of the data that I will show is based on the triennial report we produce with member states on pension adequacy, which complements the report on aging, looking more at the sustainability of pension or aging-related expenditure, prepared by colleagues in DG ECFIN, also with member states. So I will start a bit with the demographic context and also, as you know, highlighting that we are an aging society. So from now to the future, in the next decades, we see a shifting of the, let's say, the pyramid more upwards toward the older age group, which also has quite important implications for the sustainability of social protection systems. I would also like to recall that in general in the social expenditure, pensions represent the highest share of expenditure. You see in the graph on the right side, the light blue, it's about 11.4% of GDP as an average across the EU, but with very big variations. So you have countries with under 7% and countries with around 15%. So reflecting very much the big differences in the systems of the countries. With regards to, let's say, the main function of, in particular, the public pension system, which is to secure income in old age to ensure dignified life, but also poverty protection, we see that pensions in general in Europe fulfill that function, but nevertheless, we see a slowly increasing share of people in old age at risk of poverty and social exclusion. This is what we call the AROPE indicator, which stands at about 20% across the whole EU, with high discrepancies between women and men. And also we talk, just to be more clear, about more than 18 million people. And again, we talk about huge differences across countries. You see countries with relatively low shares, 11%, or going a bit between 10 and 20%. And then you see on the first graph, countries with much higher percentages, almost close to 50%, in particular in the Baltic and Eastern Europe. Also, when we look at risk of poverty alone, we see that, again, it has been slightly increasing over the past years. And in, again, the same set of countries, Central Eastern European, this is much higher compared to the working age population. But you have a number of countries where actually this risk is higher among working age population. Quick reminder also of the gender gaps in old age. With our pension adequacy report, we really highlighted throughout all different dimensions of pension, women are faring much worse than men. And these gender inequalities, they accumulate and they become much more pregnant as they advance in age. So we talk about almost 1 in 4 women that are age 75 plus that are at risk of poverty or social exclusion. And because they live longer and they live longer in poorer health, of course, also their needs in old age will be more significant in terms of health care and long-term care costs. And these gender discrepancies, they are also translating into what we call the gender pension gap. So basically, what they receive as pension, which is on average 25% lower than for men, again, with big variations across countries, but also in terms of being eligible for pension, what we call the pension coverage gap. So we look at different dimensions of pension adequacy, also to what extent the pension income is actually, relate to the income from working age, different cohorts. So we use different indicators, one that looks at the aggregate replacement ratio, uh, comparing against the income of people closer to retirement age, so 50 to 59. And this is about 60% across the EU. But again, you will see very high variation across the countries. And the same finding you see when we compare the income of older people with the average income of working age, and the same differences between men and women. In the pension adequacy report, what we also do is do projections of the pension adequacy, the income replacement, for different scenarios. So in this edition of the pension adequacy report, so we look the time horizon, would be the income replacement in 2022, and what will be income replacement in 2062 for a male earner, for a person with different career breaks. So you have different scenarios, and you see that actually, despite the recent reforms extending the working lives, increasing the pensionable age, the adequacy is going to decrease. So a message that we want to pass, that there should be concerns not only about the sustainability, but also the adequacy of pensions in the future. And also, I think we will discuss later in the panel that the way pension credits are designed and embedded into pension system can also help offset some of the negative impacts on career breaks. And going closer to the end, just to also highlight a bit, the, let's say, balance between the years we spend across Europe in working life. So on average, it's about 41.3 years that in Europe we are working, and about 21 years that we spend in retirement. And you'll see that you have cases where actually in some countries the average working life is much longer, with the retirement being shorter, or maybe countries where the working life is shorter and the retirement lives are longer. Uh, and I think this illustrates very well the many differences in the system across countries. And my last slide before we move to the panel is just to give you a glimpse of the reform trends that we see across member states with regards to pension. So from the past to the current edition of the pension adequacy report and the previous one, we see that there is a trend mostly to reinforce the adequacy of pensions, and let's say also safeguards with regards to minimum pensions level, or enhancing access for people in non-standard forms of work. We also see that compared to the trend in the past, which was very much going into, let's say, more restrictive approaches to pension ages. Now the approach is much more towards incentives and incentivizing longer working lives and combining work and retirement. And obviously very topical for the discussion today, in many countries we see the debate or reforms going on in enhancing the role of funding pension schemes and fostering individual entitlements. And I give you also the link to the pension adequacy report. And in each, we have a cross-European section and also individual country profiles for all member states and Norway for this edition. Thank you.
So for social protection, social rights and inclusion. Gertrude Pils, Vice Chair of PEKABE. She is a very committed advocate for the rights of pension savers, and she's also my colleague from the Occupational Pension Stakeholder Group of EIOPA. We have also Roger Hartmann, who is Board Director of European Financial Planning Association, and Riess, who is now a Senior Advisor of the Federation for European Securities Exchanges. So we would like today to focus on two main topics, on gender gap in this panel, but also on financial inclusion. And maybe then the first remark. So we have the Principle 15 in the European Pillar of Social Rights, and it states, and let me quote, workers and the self-employed in retirement have the right to a pension commensurate to their contributions and ensuring an adequate income. Women and men shall have equal opportunities to acquire pension rights. And it also asserts that everyone in all age has the right to resources that ensure living in dignity. So Dana, maybe first to you, we had the presentation, we heard a lot of things about pension adequacy. There are some positive things about the reforms that are ongoing. But since public pensions and public systems, public pension system fall short of those ideas that I just quoted, and we expect also demographic trends to make the situation even more difficult, do you think that supplementary pensions can meet the challenge? And if yes, how? And if no, why?
Do we need? Yeah. Okay, so we'll pass the mic to each other. Yeah, so I would say definitely yes. We see that the way forward is for member states to develop multi-pillar system, of course, taking into account in each case the national context and the tradition, and I would say the common social contract that there is in a country. We see important in incentivizing more the use of supplementary pension. Of course, a strong social dialogue, because we believe that through collective agreement, one could achieve a lot in moving forward. There are different other avenues, from tax incentives, financial incentives. Obviously, also the EIOPA had quite different pathways looking at auto-enrollment and compulsory supplementary pensions. In all these scenarios, what we try to highlight is that it's important to have the national dialogue and the national, let's say, support behind such reforms. We also know that the countries that have very strong occupational systems in place, of course, there already you see that it adds a lot in enhancing the income and protecting older people. But for the countries that are yet to develop this kind of very strong social dialogue, public society dialogue, we see as very important. And then also linked to that, we say that it's not important only to have the system in place, it's also very important to have them underpinned by strong financial literacy, awareness raising, and also targeting at the various groups that are more vulnerable and disadvantaged. And maybe one final point I want to make is that indeed, when strengthening supplementary pensions, I think it's important to also look at the positive elements in public pensions, which are precisely to address some of the inequalities in earlier lives. So I think the redistributive capacity of the public pensions, there's an element that should be reflected, not easy one, in also the other pension pillars. And also we will talk, I think, later how to give the possibility in the supplementary pensions to cater for care-related periods. So maybe I stop here.
Thank you so much, Anna. So you mentioned before the ongoing reforms in many countries, the need for the social dialogue. And I know, Gertrude, that in Austria, there is going to be some changes. And so from the perspective of the pension saver, does the situation right now in the system work for pension savers? And if not, what is the main problem according to you? And do you see, in fact, the social dialogue taking place and working well in Austria?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, we in Austria, we have the special situation that we have more than 30 years experience with defined contribution systems. So we are a bit ahead of the European, or we are far ahead of the European trend. And I may say, closer, yeah. So we are ahead of the European trend, which we now observe, which is the shift from the defined benefit to defined contribution systems. What we experience is that we in Austria, we see a problem with performance because we learned that the occupational pension system is not really able to provide sustainable and secure pensions. So this is the reason why we work towards a reform of the occupational pension law. Because from our viewpoint as members of occupational pension systems, any pension system, we have a very simple view, any pension system has one goal and nothing else. And the one goal is to provide secure and sustainable pensions at the end of the day. If this goal is not achieved, the pension system does not work, full stop. And this is the situation in Austria, that we have to take lessons of the past and to work towards an improvement of the whole occupational pension system. And one just to show the direction, to give an idea, the key problem of defined contribution systems is all the risks are put on the members, on the working people as well as on the pensioners. Yeah? And if the people bear the risks, and on the other hand, as we see in Austria, have zero rights to take any decisions, to take investment decisions, governance decisions, and so on. So we have a big imbalance in risk-taking and rights. And this is something which needs to be improved, because who takes investment decisions has to participate in the risk, in sharing the risks. Just one of the examples.
Thank you so much, Gertrude. It's in fact very right in DC pension schemes. In fact, that the risk is the whole risk is put on the participant, and the benefits are just unclear. You could say. We saw from the findings from the finance report that in fact the outcomes and the performance of the current products in which the EU citizens are invested is not looking good, and especially not good on the long-term basis and over decades. We do say that conflicts of interest in the distribution system is a major problem that contributes to the current situation. The retail investment strategy did try to tackle this issue to a certain extent. It did not work out for the time being, but there is also possibility for retail investors, consumers, pension savers, to of course turn to financial planners and financial advisors. So I would ask you, Roger, how do you see their role and how they can help the savers?
They play a central role. But before going in an explanation why it is central, I would like to state that I'm in the financial industry for 41 years, and I'm teaching academically for 43 years. So I have a certain history and experience, which means also that when I look back at panel one, I have pretty much a clear view on how it should be. There will always be a gap between when you work and when you are retired. What is unacceptable is when you work at a level of 100 and you go into pension and you have 40. That's a far too big pay gap. But the pay gap exists. So the question would be, what is, from my point of view, where it should be positioned? It should be positioned somewhere between 60 to 70 when you earn 100. And that's decent because things have somewhere to adapt. I'm a strong advocate of the 3 pillars. The pillar 1 is here just in order to make that the human being survives, and not more than that, survives. And the pillars 2 and 3, pillar 2, for me, in my view, compulsory, employee, employer, well managed, and I'm listening to you, it's not always the case, it is very big differences from countries to countries, well managed, which gives a difference, and the pillar 3, which is voluntary, and for my point of view, and I'm giving here very strong messages, do it as soon as possible. Some countries allow to do it at the age of 17, 18, begin with 17, 18. What is the latest age to begin? Very clear answer, 25. If at 25 you do not have your 3rd pillar, you do something wrong. Other statement on that one, very strong. All on equity, no guaranteed products. I explain you why, because who cares? No, you are 25. There is a financial crisis when you are 40. Who cares? You are still working. Look, I'm thinking about young people today. They will not stop to work at 65. They will stop to work at 70. And you are 40. So it's basically in 30 years. And you have a financial crisis. Who cares? So all equity, global, well diversified, US, European, Asia, technology, everything as diversified as you can do in the 3rd pillar, which is an individual voluntary contribution. And these are, for me, major milestones. So if I take now my principles, and these principles are very strong and because it's based on many experiences. So the client advisor, where does he intervene? He doesn't intervene at all at pillar 1, because this is a given. He doesn't intervene at all at pillar 2 because everything is taken care with huge volumes in a compulsory world. And you go to Switzerland, you go to Netherlands, you go to Denmark, you go to Nordic countries. There's such a big volume that you can really go into a well-diversified asset class. You see, to be very concrete, we talked this morning during panel 1 for the famous alternative investments. You cannot do it on panels on pillar 3 because you are individual. You cannot take this risk. This is for sophisticated, well-informed investors, which 99% of the normal people are not. But for the 2nd pillar, where you have basically billions of euros going around, here you have really in the US model, learning from the US model and go much more in that. What is blocking that are regulation. You know, regulators say, oh, but private equity, that's risky, infrastructure is risky, oh, hedge fund run away. But this is something that somewhere has to be adapted and seen in the right way. So you need the client advisor at the level of the pillar 3. Yes, here you need him because you need somewhere to know what to buy. Because when you say, okay, I want to be very well diversified, I want to be global, there is still a comparison to be done. And here, the financial advisor looking basically at the situation, and I'm very frustrated because the financial literacy in Europe is low. I'm Swiss Luxembourgish. I'm dual national, so I know both countries very well. One is a founding member of the EU, and the other one will never be member of the EU. So I have the 2 passports. So I have a very clear, good view on that. But what I see in Luxembourg, for example, the financial literacy of young people between 15 and 30 is amazingly low. Hey, gosh, we are not in the Western Balkans, who are candidate to the EU and good countries, very nice people. I go to Western Balkans very often for education. But we are in Luxembourg, a very well-developed neighbor country of Belgium, and it's far too low. And these have to be developed and done. And the financial advisor, a very professional financial advisor, can discuss, understand the needs. Some will be, we saw it this morning, you know, behavioral finance, completely opposite to 100% in equity. Okay, let's find. The client advisor will try to convince the young man doesn't want. We can discuss, see, but he needs advice. And the advice here is central in order to construct something consistent in an ideal world if we do it well. And in my case, it works well because I'm retired now for 2 years and it works. My environment of my pensions is 72% of what I used to earn. And that's okay. That's perfectly fine. You know, what is unacceptable is to move into places that I met in Europe where they earn 40. Hey, gosh, the gap is far too big. And this has to be addressed. And this is a main issue for me. And financial literacy and good advice is part of it.
I would totally agree. So on the topic of advice, Better Finance has always said that pension savers, citizens, investing, it's not a full-time job. Most of the time, they do not have enough skills and knowledge to do it by themselves. So we have underlined that, in fact, access to independent advice, so advice, really good advice in the interest of savers, is something they should have access to. On financial literacy, I completely agree that it should start early. 15 years old should already have pretty good understanding of especially financial mathematics, whereas we quite often have in schools something that is called math anxiety, which won't help you with your savings or investment in later life. But we also have seen that from the findings of the study, that supplementary pensions are underperforming. We have seen that the capital markets performance is there, but the question is how to transfer this capital markets performance into the accounts of the savers. So, Rainer, what do you think? What would be good alternatives for people to invest and where to invest and how?
Well, I very much share what Roger said with passion, equity, equity, equity. I think that's the answer. I think what we're doing in Europe, and there's 2 reports, Letta and especially Draghi, that are worthwhile reading, that detail a bit what we're doing wrong and what we urgently need to change. And that's why I very much share that passion. And just probably to share 2 downsides where before I come a little bit how we should invest. I think we're extremely fragmented. We have 27 jurisdictions with different withholding tax regime. Try to reclaim your withholding tax to France. You will fail. I tried it and spent a lot of money on it, and I gave up. Sending papers between my tax office in Germany and the finance ministry in France, forget it. Completely impossible. We have different securities laws. We have different governance rules. We have different supervisory outcomes from supposedly a single supervisory system, which ESMA is controlling. So I think we're not really delivering on coherent standards that are made for the individuals, for the saver and investor in Europe. We've made that really to atone to the governments of the 27 countries, but not to make it easy for the individual that is saving for their pensions. And I think this is where we really should think about the 28th regime. I personally have been passionate about that for about 20 years, and I really think it's the only way to cut the tape and to get capital into a savings and investment unit. Secondly, I think on the supply side, we channel our money wrongly to companies. And I think we see that German, European, French, Belgian companies underperform their US peers because very often they're cut off from early funding through venture capitals. It's very, very difficult for them to get money. We have lesser IPOs. They're very often bought up by their US peers at an early stage. So the exciting companies that will produce employment and growth and wealth for future generations very often decide to leave the EU or become subsidiaries of, for example, US enterprises. And I think this is also where on the supply side, we definitely need to do something. Draghi, I think, lays that out quite prominently. And then to come to your question, the demand side, I think you showed it in your study. We have expensive pension products. I have this friend that I advise once a year on his 401k. I lived in the US for a while, and he always tells me, and it's managed by Vanguard, well, he pays 0.1%. You said the average occupational pension was 0.28. That's almost 3 times. And the private pension products, you said on average 1%. Well, I can tell you in Germany, if I try to get a private pension product sponsored by my government, the German Riester plan, I pay usually 2 to 3%. Crazy. Over 24 years, you get the accumulated figures, that comes out 60-70% of what you're paying in, you're giving away as fees. Crazy, not really sustainable. So I think we have expensive products, and we have products that we're usually investing completely wrong. We're investing mostly in Europe into government bonds, and that's where our regulation supports and makes it easy for funds, and even requires that certain percentages need to be invested in so-called safe assets. And we've seen with the financial crisis that these safe assets are not always that safe. So we oblige institutional funds to go into less performing investments such as fixed income government bonds. We invest a lot still relatively new EU shares, and we do not invest what Roger is saying, a globally diversified equity portfolio with a view of 30, 40 years. That's the only way that makes sense to invest. And for example, I advise to all my friends in Germany, do not ever get into any product that the government supports, where you get a tax break. Take your money, open with an online broker an account, and buy ETFs, period.
Thank you so much. Indeed, this is also what our study shows, and in fact, the focus on equity in the AP7 SAFA product is pretty clear. So I think really we quite often talk about some regulatory solutions, but I also really think that asset managers need to learn from one another and really look to see and try to understand what works and what doesn't. And quite often the solutions are not applicable one-to-one, or you are not able to copy them one-to-one. But I think with a consistent overperformance from certain country with a certain strategy that hasn't changed so much over the years, probably it's really worth looking what is working then, right. Then maybe we could move a bit to the gender gap, and I would start maybe with Dana and with Gertrude. Because since we have right now really the trend to move toward the DC pension schemes, and the risk is more and more burn on the pension saver, don't you think that it might actually worsen the gender gap in terms of pensions, and especially since we know that the coverage in the occupational pension for women is lower? The EIOPA study and reports show it quite well. And women also in general receive lower salaries. This is also well documented and researched. And in most cases, they are the ones that are taking the career breaks to take care either of the children or some other dependents of the family. So how do you see this problem being solved in different member states, or if you're also thinking about solutions at the EU level? So maybe Dana first.
Yeah, I think whenever we get this question, we always start by saying that the problem needs to be sorted earlier. So when women are on the labor market, first you cannot try to address everything through the pension, because I think this only reflects the inequality. So basically, investing in affordable childcare and care for older people, for people with disability, is what we would say as the most important recommendation, because this can enable more women labor market participation, more intensive and less career breaks. Then when it comes to pensions, obviously there is a role to play for the pension systems. And when we did together with FISMA colleagues, we supported the experts, high-level experts that prepare the report on supplementary pensions. I think one of their key recommendations was precisely to introduce more pension credits into occupational pensions, and to some extent also in personal pension products. And to do so, we launched a study that was finalized recently, and I think was quite well disseminated in the context of your stakeholders. And one of the key findings of the study was, first and foremost, that there are very few systems, actually occupational pensions, that offer such credits. That in most of the cases it's also not easy to collect the data, because most of the provisions on the pension credits are through collective agreements, so they don't necessarily go through national legislation. But nevertheless, I think you have quite a number of good examples, concrete avenues that are offered by the in-depth analysis of the situation in Belgium, Denmark, Netherlands, Spain, and Sweden with regards to with care credits for care period. So, and as it happens also in the public pensions, I think it's much more easy to have such care credits designed for childcare, but much less common with regards to long-term care. And we say, as we are an aging society, actually, we see that we will need more and more, care for the older people, and the formal system is not there to fulfill its function. So still the burden will continue to be on family members. So this also links a bit to the overarching, in addition to pensions, to the overarching, I would say, design of the care systems from early childhood to long-term care, and to what extent in the end the state is able to fulfill its role of providing affordable services at all stages in life. So maybe I stop here.
Yes, and Gertrude, from the perspective of an Austrian pension saver and the problem of the gender gap in pension and possible solutions, I don't know if this is also tackled during the social dialogue for the reforms that are supposed to take place in Austria.
Yes, and yeah, I may say, unfortunately, we have the same discussions all the time. Every year we celebrate, so to say, at the beginning of October, somewhere, the Equal Pension Day, or better to say, the Unequal Pension Day. Unfortunately, I do not have the solution in Austria. So what I can say from our perspective is, a couple of years ago, Austria introduced for the public pension system the possibility of a voluntary pension splitting between parents. Unfortunately, as far as I know, so far we have just a handful of cases of people that have chosen this voluntary pension splitting possibility. So currently there is an discussion, respectively, demands from social partners that pension splitting should be obligatory, but it's an ongoing discussion, an open discussion. On the other hand, what I see is that financial literacy is a very hot, always and still hot topic. It's both as well my personal experience that women are less aware and less informed about financial management than male colleagues, for example, and it's also proven by several research research is conducted. So financial literacy, I mean, should be intensified for both genders, but in particular, especially for women. What I would also say as a third topic, yes, of course, occupational pensions could help to close the gap, provided it is able to close the gap for the whole, for both genders. but especially for women. But here's the question, so who should pay for? Is it a voluntary payment into a pension fund by the spouse? Is it a payment by the employer, or is it a subsidy by the government? Yeah. But this is also an open discussion. There are a couple of ideas, but as I said, unfortunately and honestly, no real solution so far.
Thank you so much. You mentioned financial literacy. I already said, but finance supports it very much, and especially doing this rightly from the very early age, so primary school and also then high school. However, at the same time, it's pretty clear there is also some studies confirming this. One of them is a study done for the Central Bank of Ireland, that even people who are very financially literate, even people who have graduated for economics and financial studies, when it comes to their pensions, they are first of all not proactive, and they're not really taking care of their supplementary or third pillar pension. And you, Roger, said that the latest that people should start saving for retirement would be 25 years old. But then the question is, what in case of people who have really very low income? What if they can save, let's say, only 20 euros per month? What do you think? And I will come back to the to PEP, because Better Finance was very enthusiastic and very supportive of the idea from the very beginning. And we really see a promise with this product, even though there is only one provider so far offering PEP. Do you think PEP would be a solution for people with such low income?
If you allow me, I would like to just give a few words about the gender gap, because that's a major issue. And a male is saying that because it's a real issue. And I go again to my two countries, where I belong. Luxembourg, the pay gap is 0. There's no pay gap. It's the only country of the European Union with 0 pay gap. Perhaps it's 0.011, I don't know, but it's, for me, 0. You go to Switzerland, the pay gap is close to 20%. You have, after different elements, you have in Luxembourg a huge parental leave, very broad offer. You have a child care system, which is highly developed. You go to Switzerland, it's exactly the contrary. There is no parental leave, nearby no. Childcare is extremely difficult, extremely complicated. This impacts the second time the woman in the Swiss situation, because she has to come back to the work with a 60% salary, 60% employment, because she cannot work 100%, because the structures do not exist. So I'm very concerned by that one, because one other element where I see the female is always on the losing side. She's earning less. She doesn't have the structures. The children are here. And the third element where basically it begins a third time worse is in the case of divorce. Because in the case of divorce, because as she's systematically lower in the divorce, she will lose again. So she's losing 3 times. And that's something that should somewhere be addressed on a European level, because the differences from countries to countries is just simply huge. This is just what I wanted to say. Now, going back to the persons who are basically at minimum salary. And we have plenty of people all over Europe who are at minimum salary. The minimum salary in Luxembourg is around 3,000 plus euro. In some other parts of Europe, you are at 1,000 euro. And after you begin to think, what could you do for your planning of retirement, where at the end of the month, you have just simply a 20 euro banknote on your account. That's basically a big concern, because I see no solution. And this is something where, so how is it addressed? It is addressed via social help. But social help is you see, it's something which is difficult. Some people have problem with that. Of course, in some countries, we take Portugal, there is a huge family network in Portugal, people will stick together, work together, and this person earning 800 euros will be supported by all the other family members. But you go in Northern Europe, this solidarity of the family, a little bit in a very Catholic sense of the word, is much less important in a Lutheran world. So it's really up to European regulation to think about it, because your question was, how do these people do? How can they save for their pension? And you know what? I have no answer, because when you have 20 euros at the end of the month, you keep it because perhaps you need new glasses, perhaps you need to go to the dentist, and what do? So for pension, we go again in the gym, survive, and survive means no money for pension. And that's an issue, and I have no answer.
Okay, so Roger have no answer. I will turn then to Rainer. During COVID, we have seen that there was a surge in investment. People were turning also to many online solutions, neo-brokers, to invest. In that time also, there were more and more women investing. In our membership across member states, we see that in general, women are a minority in terms of individual member of our member organizations. Some of our member organizations try to change this and in fact are organizing, for example, trainings on investments directed just to women, and they see they're quite popular. And in fact, though, in those trainings that are really only women focused, women do speak and are engaged and are really participating and learning a lot. In terms of investments, do you think that what kind of alternatives would you see, and also in terms of motivating and encouraging women more to invest? Because paradoxically also it seems, and studies and research shows it, then once women start invest, they even get better outcomes and results than men do.
Absolutely, and I fully agree to that. I will come to that probably at the end of what I'll say. I'll start with probably the paradise that you had also on your slide, the AP7, the Swedish investment service account, which I think you showed had a 357% performance over 24 years and continuously shows excellent results for Swedish citizens that invest in it. And if you combine such an ISK, for example, for low-income earners with some government subsidies where they can save up, then I think you have a nice package that can also help. And I think that's where Europe simply needs more ISKs and needs more cost-efficient auto-enrollment plans where the government also helps the poor to have savings for old age. And if that happens, I think then literacy will come along. And maybe I report a little bit from my own experience. I was 15 when I did an exchange to the US. And what greatly inspired me is when, at dinner time, there was a discussion on the 401k and how to invest. What do we do? What do we do with our money for old age? And the girl and the boy and myself were sitting around the table and listening to the parents discussing how to invest their money for old age, something that is not happening in most European countries. I think it is happening in Sweden. And that's why Swedish women and Swedish boys, I think, are much more financial literate than the average European. And I think this is certainly, how do we address financial literacy? I think by involving ourselves in the decision. And you said it is a lot about governance. Empower us, don't keep us. And a lot of our financial regulation treats the investor as dumb and that he cannot take the decision himself and that he needs an advisor. And the advisor usually charges high fees and very often recommends the product he needs to sell rather than what is a good product for the lifetime saving of an investor. And I think we have all this discussion around advice, but I think, advice really needs to be meaningful in the interest of the investor, of the saver, and not of the advisor. Another point to mention, crypto alternatives. I think if you look how easy it is to open a Bitcoin account, where you're all of a sudden in the Bahamas or somewhere in the Pacific on an island and you have no regulation, you have no control, yes, since Trump took office, it's performed incredibly, but will you ever get your money? You don't know. So I think, and I come back to your original question, I think this is really where also this private investment through disruptors, the online brokerages that we've seen during COVID is something extremely positive in my view. We need to make it easy to have on your phone something where the young people and that, you know, they are really in TikTok, Instagram, or whatever. They're also on here. They can easily invest, see this, and absolutely what you're saying. If we're able to get these people financially more literate, if we are able to get them engaged, if we're able that they look at their portfolio every day, then I think they will be good investors, and women usually do extremely well in this. So I think this is really where also I would hope in the Savings Investment Union, we will do much more that individual investors can more easily invest here.
Thank you, Rainer. Better Finance, in fact, is right now finalizing research on new brokers. So I'm not going to preclude the findings because it's still not finalized, but then I invite everybody to stay tuned for December when we are going to publish the results. Yes, well, advice, as always, it's good and it's worth even paying for, provided that it really provides good outcomes, independent and done in your best interest. I wanted to check if there is any question from the room. There is one, okay.
Thank you very much. I've been a little bit carried away by the passion of the panel, so I have several questions. So the first one is about advice. So what I found within Europe is, as you mentioned, good quality financial advice is very expensive, and it is only reserved for the wealthy, because good wealth managers, good financial advisors are not going to take care of you if you do not have a certain threshold of amount on your bank account, and it is a huge problem. And I'm curious about your views, how technology, AI, and other innovative solutions can democratize the access to financial advice, not just in terms of access to the advice, but in terms of getting impartial advice. Because if I'm going to write an algorithm, it is not going to pack financial products into your portfolio for which I'm going to receive a distribution fee or a trailer commission. And my second question is about financial products. You mentioned that they are extremely expensive or way more expensive than their US counterparts, for example. And I just wanted to mention when we have looked at this problem, the shocking fact was that we have seen this Europa percentage in Central and Eastern Europe, how high it is. So there is a correlation that the price of the financial products available on the Central and Eastern European markets are the highest within the European Union. And we are not talking about 200, 300 basis points. We are talking about 4, 5, 6, and sometimes 800 basis points for a mutual fund, which is crazy. But what do you think? Isn't it a chicken and egg problem? Because in the US, when you have a mutual fund having an AUM of $80 billion or $100 billion with a very deep, efficient, liquid market, charging 3 basis points, you're still good. But Europeans are not going to invest if they see that the product is very expensive, but how you can lower the prices if no one is going to invest into your product. Thank you.
I think I will take the advice question because I'm feeling very much at ease on that one rather than on the other one, for the simple reason that I'm no more operationally involved due to my age. So I really met on strategic issue, but it's a good question what you ask. And it's basically right. You know, how is banking structure organized now for the last 30 years? If you have financial investable assets of 1 million euro, you get the best-in-class service everywhere. That is called wealth management, private banking. And after you have what is called the affluent banking, affluent, core affluent clients. These are somewhere between 200,000 euro and 1 million euro. And these ones also, in some type of pooling approach, get some decent advice in the environment. And after you have the so-called normal retail client, the client who has an investable asset base of below 200,000 euro. And here it's more tricky. And I have somewhere to admit that a new technology will help a lot, because banks are somewhere going into this direction. Artificial intelligence will help a lot. It will help the financial advisors to cover different needs, also going to the so-called retail. It's interesting because I had this discussion recently with the state bank in Luxembourg, who has basically this issue: what do we do with this type of normal clients below these 200? And here, pooling approach, artificial intelligence, calling centers, documentation, some types of open seminars in a branch, in a medium-sized village. All these things could probably bring away, but this is still, and I agree with you, an issue. Where does the retail client really get the information? It's more difficult, but I think that technology, luckily, will help us a lot. That was on the advisory side.
Maybe I talk a little bit about the products. I think if you said up to 8%, 800 basis points in some Eastern European countries, well, don't do. I think, and yes, Europe has this problem of fragmentation. We do have higher costs to transact in our markets, unfortunately. And I said this is something I hope that will be addressed, 28th regime. But you have one product that is only slightly more expensive than in the US, and that's exchange-traded funds, ETFs. You can buy them starting at 0.1% in the EU via online brokerages. And if you just buy one globally diversified ETF and you get rid of all the advice, you get rid of all the government subsidies, etc., you will just do fine and probably be similar to your AP7 product with 357% in 24 years. As you said, over a lifetime of pension, that's the right thing to do. And that's the benchmark, I think, that also politicians should rightly put when they're discussing about how to invest. Look at the ISK, look at the 401k in the US, look at an ETF plan. Those are the comparisons where I think pension funds should be benchmarked again for delivery for the citizen. And I think what we're doing in between is funding a huge interest of industry with distribution mechanism, paying good salaries to people. And you know, I don't have anything against them, but, you know, it is something that ultimately is undermining the viability of the pension system, and I think is an issue of democracy. And, you know, we're simply not wealthy enough anymore to afford to throw so much money in distribution and burning that money. We need to give it back to the pensioners.
Yes, if I may also just quickly respond, but the finance has talked a lot about the problems we see in the distribution system of retail investment product in the European Union. We have totally supported the findings of the study of the European Commission from 2018. And there is a huge problem with the distribution system and with the system of advice. I do not agree with and I think it's a myth really that has to be debunked, that the independent advice is so costly. And in fact, if you look to the Better Finance position paper on the retail investment strategy, we have done a case study and we have compared the cost of the traditional advice, the commission-based advice over a period of horizon of 10 years of investing period, and the independent advice. We took the case study from France, and it's clear that the cost of independent advice is much more worth for you, because you're getting not only a better product that is performing well over the investment horizon, but you're actually also paying less, because the one-off cost of advice is much less than the trailing commissions you have to pay over the years. So this is the question of the commission, and this is of course also correlated with the cost of the products. Quite often the products you are having recommended by non-independent advisor are quite costly. So this is also the answer to your question, why so many people are invested in very costly products. I don't know if Dana or Gertrude want to comment, or if there is still another.
Thank you. Maybe a question on the design also of the public system, and basically given the decrease in replacement rates. And my question is whether more drastic policy measures are necessary, because we can all count that people start opening their own accounts and investing in that. But basically what we see, there is a kind of design flaw that we see governments retracting a bit from first pillar system. And it's not sure that the second and third pillar solutions will solve this issue over a long term. So my question is, why not be more active in developing auto-enrollment type of systems, so that there's at least minimum amounts of savings will be combined into solutions that provide income later on?
I see that Gertrude wants to answer.
I'll tell you something. Yes, indeed, we miss in Europe a certain additional, a real third pillar, like it is available in the United States, for example. In the United States, there's the 401k account, which is an individual account where the employee as well as the employer pay in with a certain tax relief, and the employee is in the retiree, and in the later consequence is able to manage this retirement account by himself or herself. So it's an individual pension account which enjoys all the benefits or tax benefits of an occupational account, but can be managed by the person itself. And this is also one, let me say, one tool or one part of the market which makes the US capital market so vital, yeah, because there are so many people, and I do not remember the percentage, but many people who participate in the capital market.
Everybody does. It's cultural.
Yeah. So they have gained the financial literacy.
Yes.
So it for sure it took many years, it took decades, but I think some win, and better earlier than later. Europe should also start to provide the proper regulation for individual retirement accounts. And just one word to the whole discussion. Yeah, I am personally a big fan of equity markets and equity investments. But what I learned is for the pension system, the risk is not the capital market. The risk is the asset manager. And I give you just two very simple examples. Yeah, you can invest. Let's go 1 year ago, just 1 year ago. You can invest in an NVIDIA share, and you have doubled your capital. You have doubled your investment. On the other hand, you can invest in a so-called ESG and green positive example of the battery producer Varta. At least German colleagues know it very well. And you have lost all your capital and investment. So the danger is not the capital market in itself. It's the danger and the risk and I'm coming back to the participants of occupational funds, is the asset manager who decides in which investment do we invest. You can hear and you can be there.
I very much agree to what you said, and probably just two small comments. The ISK account in Sweden, for example, that is an account like in the US. So every Swedish citizen, I think, gets that opened with a Swedish Riksbank, and then there's a default auto-enrolled plan administered by the central bank, or you can choose to have a private manager to that. And of course, to the point of asset managers, I think diversification, diversification, diversification. Buy a well-diversified fund, and you're usually well protected against the swings. Also, probably, betting only on NVIDIA is maybe risky in the long term, but certainly having something, a little bit of everything is a good strategy in the long term.
Indeed, I would also say that we also as Better Finance quite often refer to the ISK in Sweden. It does work. The people are invested there, and they are basically also learning by doing. So the financial literacy also comes as you invest. This is one thing. And there were also recommendations from, I think, the Neuer report, but also from the council on this investment, let's say, retirement account. And I hear that part of the policymakers and market participants, stakeholders say, we don't need another toy, we don't need another product or wrapper or anything. But I really think that if investment retirement account on a EU level was done and designed rightly, it could really be transformational.
Yeah, and one word with regard, as you mentioned, to the ETFs. Yeah, I totally agree. It was never in history so easy to participate in capital markets. If we take today the offering of ETFs, and we at PEKABE did analysis of performance comparison over 30 years. Yeah, if you invested in a mix of 50% fixed income and 50% MSCI index product like an ETF, yeah, you can achieve over 30 years a performance of 8 to 9%, which would be really perfect and everybody happy with the pension fund. Yeah. Pension funds, I don't say the number, but our pension funds in Austria are far, far below that figure. Yeah. So I don't want to make all the fund managers in the world, so to say, without work, but with ETFs, we really have a great alternative during these days. Maybe
just it's all about education at all levels. I have the chance and opportunity to advise the regulator in the Republic of Montenegro, which is probably the next country of the East Balkan to join the EU, because they're closer and closer to reach it. And some other countries like Kosovo and Albania are more far away. And it's all about education. And the regulator pushes financial literacy, control, stimulation, podcasts. Everything is done in Montenegro to increase this awareness. They have the same problem that we have. They have also a population which is getting older. It's less than obviously in the western part of Europe, but still they are very conscious and a lot of things are done. Of course, it's a small country. I mean, we look at France, 66 million people. Montenegro has probably less than 1 million. Things are much more simpler in a small country, always. Look at Liechtenstein. I was in Liechtenstein last Monday. Everything is simple. There are 40,000 people. So it's like a village, easy to manage. But when you have this awareness about education and financial literacy, for me, it's a key to so many things. And it's really my key message every day. That's why also I came to Brussels for that. Yes.
Yeah, maybe just a quick reaction to the earlier question, I think, about the need for more radical changes to the design of the pension system. And I would start with auto-enrollment, because I think indeed this was one of the recommendations from the EIOPA work. And I would say that, yes, it could work, but it could work in a certain context. And we also need to look at how our labor markets are evolving, because auto-enrollment supposes that the funds are established for a given sector, for people with a traditional employment relation, and it's much less relevant for about the 40% of our labor market workforce, which is in non-standard forms of employment, in digital platforms, self-employed, in all kind of strange contracts which are not attached to collective bargaining and to typical employment relations. So I think we also, for those kind of workers, obviously contributing to the public schemes or to the private pension product will be most obvious choice. Then I come back a bit to the, let's say, limits of the EU competence, because of course it needs to be a national choice in terms of how member states design systems, but we have the role and we should do more in showcasing what are the advantages, the pros and cons in different systems. And I think precisely as member states are encouraged now to develop the multi-pillar system, we really need to highlight those that work and precisely to counter-argue, let's say, not counter-argue, but bring evidence that personal pension products can work. There are countries where you have a good experience with good returns, and to put this evidence much more upfront, because yeah, the evidence that we have so far is more on the negative side.
Thank you. I would say we would close now and we would move the discussions also to the lunch break. I wanted to thank everybody who stayed with us so far for the two very great discussions, for very good presentations that we had also between the panels, that also brought additional light on different risks one can and opportunities that one can have as an investor. And I would say that overall, the recommendations that Better Finance has put forward in our pensions report, and these recommendations actually have not changed in the last years, because not much has changed also in the landscape in the EU, remain very, very much valid. And one very positive message from today's discussions, I would say really capital markets are not the risk, and the personal pension product is a promising tool. And hopefully it's going to be used more and more for the benefit of the pension savers. Thank you so much, everybody.